Hi, you guys. So let's talk about the Articles of Confederation. So we like to talk about the U.S. Constitution and about how great it is, and it really is a very good document. If you think about the comparison of the U.S. Constitution and the Alabama Constitution, for example, um, the U.S. Constitution was written in 1789, and we have only had 27 amendments to the Constitution, whereas the Alabama Constitution was written, the one that we're using currently was written in 1901, and we have had over 1,000 amendments. The Alabama Constitution is actually one of the longest constitutions in the world. So, really, the Constitution is a very revolutionizing document, but it was not our first version of government. The Articles of Confederation were. Now, I will tell you that from now on, I really do not refer to them as the Articles of Confederation, and I do not type them out. I label them the AOC because that's just a lot easier to type, and I know that y'all prefer to abbreviate when you write notes. So I will be calling it the Articles and the AOC. So in June 1776, the Continental Congress decides that they need to create a national government. So they form a committee. We talked about this in the last video. Congress is going to form a committee to get this done. And in the committee's eyes, the U.S. is to be a confederation where the delegates seek to have a firm league of friendship among the 13 colonies, and each colony will retain their independence, their sovereignty, their freedom, and that's what they go with. On June 12th, 1777, Congress adopts the nation's first constitution, which is the Articles of Confederation. Now, before it can go into effect, it has to be ratified. And there's this big event in 1777 going on in the US, and that is the Revolutionary War. So, the war effort really kind of hinders adoption. But you also have land disputes between the smaller states and the larger states, particularly in regard to land that was west of the Appalachian Mountains, which we're going to talk about in a bit. And it took some time to convince all of the states to ratify, and you had to have all 13 states to ratify. And it was not until 1781 when Maryland finally agreed that it was passed in all 13 states. So, the biggest thing that you need to know about the AOC is that it created a very weak national government. There was no provision for an executive office or a judicial system, and we're going to talk about why that's bad in a bit. It did create a Congress, which is good, but it only had one house, and each state only has one vote, which sounds good, right? Every state has one vote. And to pass legislation, 9 states have to agree. And to make changes to the articles, all 13 states have to agree. And all of that sounds great, but we're going to see that that's going to be an issue. Congress can act in matters that are common interest to the states, and that includes the following things. They can admit new states to the Union, which is great. We can add more states. We can organize the division of Western lands. We can settle disputes between states. We can organize a postal service. We can coin and borrow money. We can appoint military officers, and we can raise an army. And we're going to see that of those responsibilities, the only ones that they do really well are organize the division of Western lands and organize the postal service. The other ones don't work out so well. So here is all of that in a chart. We're going to be talking about these things. So take a look at the chart in your notes, you guys, which are hopefully on Schoology by now. So let's talk about some weaknesses of the articles. So while limiting the power of Congress sounds great, it really limits the things that they can get done. There is not an executive branch, right? So there's no president. The ultimate job of the president is to execute the laws. So when Congress makes laws, it is their job to carry those laws out, and there isn't anybody to do that under the Articles. There is not a national court system. So there is no Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court is ultimately the one who decides how we are going to apply these national laws. And Congress has to rely on the states to do that. And we talked about this in class today. Why would the states why would they apply national laws if they really don't have to? So that's going to be an issue. And this is something that I'm going to say multiple times. The Articles denied Congress the power to tax. And that is something that is going to be a major, major, major problem because Congress has to ask the states for money and they're not going to give it to them. And we'll talk more about this in just a second. So Congress cannot regulate commerce or trade between the states. Today we talked about that if you bought something in like Georgia and you went to Virginia, Virginia would often tax goods that you had bought in Georgia. And that was a common practice. So Congress could not regulate that and they could not intervene. Congress can coin money, and that's great. But the problem with that is that they are not the only entity who can do so. The states could also coin money. And ultimately, when you have several different currencies in play, that creates barriers for economic development in trade and in commerce, and it leads to inflation. And that's a problem, particularly we're going to talk about in a second. There is a depression going on in the US during this time. That's going to be an issue because money does not hold its value, and that's going to be a problem. We talked a minute ago about the states each have one vote and that it takes 9 states to pass laws. That sounds lovely. The problem is that in practice, it did not work out well. It was a very rare moment when the states would all agree to pass laws. In addition, we talked about that you had to have all 13 states to agree to changes to the Articles. So if one state disagreed, that would stop the entire process. And that meant that there were not a lot of changes made to the Articles. One of the good things that the Articles did was the passing of the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. Now, this becomes the foundation and the template for all Western expansion for the next 125 years. So this is very significant. This is one of the great things that they did. All right, this established a plan for settling the Northwest Territory, which includes areas that are in now Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Ohio, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. So if you take a look at the map of the United States, that's really a lot of areas up by the Great Lakes. I have a crash course video, hopefully, for you guys to look at. And on the map, you'll be able, because he presents a map with all of those. So make sure you take a look at that as well. The important thing is that it creates a system for admitting the new states in this territory. So we have a system for admitting new states. And this one's big. It bans slavery in the territory because this is going to be a problem for the next, 80 plus years. It's going to be a problem all the way up until the American Civil War. And it bans slavery. That's a big deal, y'all. And we're going to see that as we go on. It also included a Bill of Rights that would guarantee certain things to those who settled, like representative government, religious freedom, trial by jury, as well as other freedoms. So this was very important, and this is something that they did very well. This is one of the high points in the Articles of Confederation. And I said this, but I'm going to say it again. One of the largest problems was money. Congress had borrowed heavily from foreign creditors, from other countries, as well as other wealthy Americans in order to pay for the war effort. And life skill here, when you borrow money, they are going to expect you to pay it back. So whenever I borrowed money to go to college from the federal government, and the federal government expects me to pay that money back, right? That is something that happens when you're an adult. Welcome to life. And in addition, they owed wages to the soldiers who fought in the American Revolution. My job is teaching you, and I clock in and I clock out every day because I want to be paid, because I'm not doing this job for free. I get paid for this, right? I love what I do, but I still need to be paid for it. And it's the same thing for these soldiers. These men and these women, particularly men, have fought for their freedom, and they have not been paid. They need to be paid. And how does the government pay for things? The government pays for things through taxes. That is how the government does things today. They tax the people. And one example would be income tax, right? On my paycheck, on my pay stub, there is a percentage that the Tuscaloosa County holds out because that is part of the taxes that they have to pay on me, right? So I pay taxes every month with my paycheck, right? The problem with the articles is that they cannot tax the people. And this is a major problem. They have no money to pay for things. They can't pay these people their wages. They can't pay back their debts. This is a problem. In 1783, this further shows the issue, okay? In 1783, Congress calls on the states to approve a tax on imports, so things coming in from other countries, and they needed unanimous consent. Unanimous means that all 13 states had to agree. And by 1787, so 4 years later, only 9 of the 13 had consented. So they were not getting any money from imports. States were not willing to give money to the federal government, but the federal government relied on the states to get money to pay back its debts. So this is a very big problem. They have people they need to pay, and they're trying to get money. They're trying to borrow money from the states, and the states aren't giving it to them. That's an issue. Something else that was an issue, the economy was very slow to recover following the war. And generally, following war, the economy will go one of two ways. It will go super well, or it will go super bad. And one example of it going well is following World War I. Following World War I, the industrial economy in Europe was devastated. It was destroyed, literally. And they had no way of manufacturing because they're having to rebuild it. So the United States becomes the manufacturing powerhouse following World War I. And we see such great economic benefits. The 1920s are an excellent example of that, right? That is an example of when things go well. But following the American Revolution, things did not go well. And there was a depression. And something that you can always take to the bank is that farmers are going to be hard hit by depressions. And that's something that we're going to see throughout American history. And that's going to be a problem, a major problem in the AOC. And we're going to see that in just a minute. States pursue their own interests. they they ignore the laws that Congress has set out, and they ignore treaties that they have signed, and they just decide they're going to skip the national government and they're going to negotiate directly with foreign powers themselves. Why should they have to deal with the national government when they can do it themselves? George Washington described it as 13 sovereignties that are pulling against one another. So, in other words, 13 different countries who are pulling against each other, and they are tugging at the federal head. They are not getting anything done together as a whole. So, in class, we took a look at this um, painting, this drawing, and we are going to talk briefly about Shays' Rebellion. And you guys are going to do this online as well. So, in September 1786, there was a group of Massachusetts farmers who were about to lose their land because they had borrowed money and the bank was calling in the loan, and they don't have the money to pay it back. And so they, understandably freak out. The problem with their freak out, though, is they decide that they're going to go attack some courthouses. So they are led by a man who his name is Daniel Shays, and he was a Revolutionary War captain. He served under General George Washington, and he, as well as others, they went to courthouses and they attacked the courthouses to prevent the judges from foreclosing on their farms. And this goes on for a time, like through 1787. It goes until June 1787. And there were over 2,500 men who had joined in the rebellion. Shays even got weapons from a military arsenal. Okay. And Massachusetts asked for assistance. But quite frankly, Congress doesn't have the money, nor do they have the military forces to give them. So Massachusetts is kind of on their own. And so they have to pull together a militia to put down the rebellion. Ultimately, they do. But the reason we talk about Shays' rebellion and the reason it's so important is because it was a real life, real time example of how weak the Articles of Confederation were. You could actually see how the Congress was unable to do things in real time, and it was a real example, and it affected lots of people. So that is a big reason why we talk about Daniel Shays and Shays' Rebellion. So we will stop here for this section, and we will pick up with the next section at attempts to change. So I hope this has been very helpful for you guys, and I look forward to seeing you on the next video.